is it, when you're saying that it's a CBD isolate. Now we have full spectrum, we have water soluble, we have liposomal type products that are out there. Are those legally? How are those? Are those considered under the Epidiolex? Because they're not necessarily, like full spectrum is not a isolate. So how is the legal issues with around that?
So this is going to bring us to a similar discussion about the difference between marijuana and hemp, which is purely a legal fiction, right? It's the same plant. It's Cannabis sativa L. The difference is that someone has specifically picked genetic strains of the plant to have a lower level of THC, but everywhere else genetically that plant is identical to the marijuana plant that is on Schedule 1 and is not hemp. So when we're talking about Epidiolex as an isolate, or Epidiolex, the isolate of CBD, that is definitely going to be a drug. But you could arguably, and I think with some high chance of winning in a court, be able to argue that a full spectrum hemp oil is not CBD isolate and is therefore not a drug under Epidiolex, is not Epidiolex. So it would be a separate thing altogether. And that might win. It hasn't been tested, however. So we're still in a gray area where full spectrum or water soluble or any of those other terms that we use for a CBD it's definitely a gray area. It's lower level of risk, but it's going to have to be tested or legislated.
Okay, so hold on, because we have CBD from the hops plant. You can extract CBD from the hops plant. You can extract CBD from other sources as well. So what if it gets extracted from hops and it doesn't even come from the marijuana plant? So if you're isolating it, at the end of the day, in my opinion, if I was to isolate a vitamin C out of an orange or a lemon, it's still vitamin C at the end of the day. Depending if we know where we're extracting it from. And so how does that, from a legality standpoint, how do they, because from a medical standpoint, we can't test what source it came from. If it came from marijuana, if it came from hemp, if it came from hops, we can't medically know where it was sourced from.
And it's a really good point. I think we both saw this last weekend in Anaheim. We saw a CBD extract that was supposed to come from a combination of lichen and oranges. I think was their source. Mm-hmm. And if that's possible to get the same structure right now under the law, it's even more of a gray area because there's nothing in the CSA that would say specifically that CBD is a controlled substance. What it says is marijuana is a controlled substance, and the DEA has taken that to mean that any extract from marijuana would be a controlled substance. However, if the extract is not from marijuana and it's from some other plant and you're getting the same chemical compound out of that, then arguably that's not a controlled substance. Again, it would take a test in either a court where the DEA has tried to do an enforcement action, or it would take some sort of legislative initiative. When it can't, the example I would give you is synthetic THC, and synthetic THC is separately scheduled now because of that. Because what they were able to do was synthesize THC in the lab or some similar form of it, and then when that was then put out, it had such a bad effect and was so uncontrollable and so unknowable that they immediately moved it onto the schedule. So THC in its synthetic form is a separately scheduled substance.
Interesting, because I believe that drug is actually called Marinol, and I know a lot of physicians hate it. The physicians that I have talked to just dislike it, but I believe that that's the synthetic form of THC from a clinical standpoint.
Right.
Ideally,
and and Marinol is an actual approved drug from the FDA. The synthetic form that was put on the schedule that everybody's afraid of was what was being added to what they called bath salts and all of that. That was the fear. The Marinol that's out there is an actual legitimate drug and has legitimate uses and purposes. And so, yeah, physicians that are afraid of it are probably afraid of it not because of what it actually is capable of doing, but because it is associated with marijuana.
Mm, mm. What do you